It's time for another episode of OceanInSight with your hosts Paul Tuda and Hauke Kegler on this beautiful MeerWissen Monday. MeerWissen is an initiative that supports partnerships between African and German marine research institutions through a dedicated funding program. This time we virtually move to the western side of Africa to Mauritania, where we will talk about protecting the largest cold water coral reef in the world with partners you might not expect. We will also touch upon translating those scientific findings into meaningful information for policymakers, the general public, and local communities. Joining us today to discuss some of the first exciting results of the WASP project, one of the many MeerWissen partnership projects, are Sandra Kloff and André Freiwald. Sandra is working for the NGO Nature Mauritania, while André is currently the director of the Senckenberg am Meer, a research institute in Wilhelmshaven and Hamburg, Germany. So join us as we take a deep dive to the threatened reefs of Mauritania. Welcome, André and Sandra. Thanks for joining us today for this. I think it's the fourth episode already of the OceanInSight podcast. Let's start with a little bit of background information of your project. WASP, that's quite an interesting name for a marine-based project. Maybe can you give us a bit of a brief background on the project and how it was conceived?
Yes, I can try. First of all, we live in a world of acronyms, and relating a terrestrial insect with a marine project sounds on first sight a little bit odd. But if you look at the title, West African Biodiversity Under Pressure, then you are right into the topic. And that is important to create awareness. We have two partners. One is IMOP, the Mauritanian Institute for Fisheries and Oceanography, and the other partner is an NGO with the name Nature Mauritanie, and the representative of this partner is Sandra. Senckenberg and myself are the coordinating institution in that project.
Thanks. You work in the very famous, and all the Francophones will hate me until the end of time now, Banc Dargah National Park, which is not only the largest marine protected area in Africa, but it's also home to a very recently discovered cold water reef. What's so special about the area?
I'm a geologist by training, and that makes the story very interesting, because when I entered Mauritanian waters 15 years ago for the first time in my life, we entered also the Banc Dargah with a German research vessel, but not stepped on land by that time. But this is an area where within 8,000 years, which is nothing for a geologist or for mankind even, this area has experienced a dramatic seascape and landscape change that also inflicts strongly with the livelihood of the people living in this area, called Banc Dargah, called Mauritania later on. So 8,000 years ago, just a few sentences on that, it was a green Sahara. There was a river as large as the river Nile today, the so-called Tamarinset River, that enters Mauritania and the Banc Dargah as a river environment, and thereby creating through erosion all the many canyons in front of the Banc Dargah. Later on, when sea level rose, the Banc Dargah became a lake. So the people living around the Banc Dargah were first riverine fishermen, then lake fishermen, mostly more or less freshwater fishermen. And then when the transgression jumped over the barrier fencing off the Banc Dargah environment, it became a Wadden Sea for the first time 4,000 years ago or so. That's the situation today. And now you have the famous Wadden Sea National Park with all its beauty of different ecosystem in the shallow water. And you have the deepwater coral reef, which is the largest deepwater coral reef in the world, along the slope of Mauritania and 400 to 600 meter water depths at a minimum length of 580 kilometers. And it probably extends south into the Senegal.
Thank you so much, André. That's a very interesting background, and I guess that gives us a very good picture of the study area. Maybe if I can bring Sandra on board as well. Sandra, please, can you tell us some of the pressing threats that are affecting the ecosystem or biodiversity in this region, and what role does your NGO play in all this?
Well, the Banc Dargah Park is, of course, famous. It's really well protected. Only artisanal fishermen with sailing vessels, traditional sailing vessels, can exploit the area. But however, this is like a little oasis amidst large-scale exploitation. Actually, the Banc Dargah is surrounded by what we sometimes call the Berlin Wall of nets that are all around it. And the nets are put there by the artisanal fishing fleet, who exploits the shallower waters, but with motorized vessels. So there's a huge fleet of motorized vessels that nowadays that mainly fish on octopus in the area. A little bit further, there is the shelf break, and this is actually the richest area of the Mauritanian ecosystem. And this is also where the upwelling takes place and where these coral reefs are that André talked about. So there are really different segments, and the shelf break is the area where almost all the industrial fishing fleet is concentrated. So if you look, for example, on a website like Global Fishing Watch that track vessels with AIS system, you can really see well, it's like a smear of dots all around this upwelling area, and this is where all the biggest fishery resources are, and the whole area is exploited from A to Z, except of course the Banc Dargah. But this is just the coastal area, and the Banc Dargah only comprises a part of the ecosystems that are in Mauritania. And like André said, all these ecosystems are interlinked. So the most threatened ecosystems are outside the Banc Dargah Park, of course. But due to that, the Banc Dargah Park itself is also very much threatened, because it depends on these ecosystems outside that are actually on the verge of disappearing. For example, the industrial fishing fleet uses heavy troll gear, and this type of gear gets stronger and stronger and heavier, and they can rake up coral habitats. So this should be protected quite urgently.
Sounds like a lot is going on there already. Any more things that come to mind?
Yeah, the latest development in that area is fishmeal factories. So the Mauritanians were actually a little bit fed up with the industrial foreign fleet, mostly, that just take the catch and export it away on board factory vessels. So they wanted the catches to land in Mauritania, and that something is done with these fishery resources to create jobs for a large unemployed population, because this area has been subject to great droughts in the 70s and 80s, and lost their means of subsistence livelihoods.
Well, just listening to you, I'm just so overwhelmed by the number of issues that are emerging from this area. I mean, if I may just recollect a few. So André started by giving us a brief, background about how important this area is in terms of biodiversity. And then you've kind of given us just, also a snapshot of some of the stakeholders who are using the resource here. and perhaps even some of the conflicts that are emerging based on the extractive uses. And let me just follow this up by asking, how do you manage in WASP to bring all these stakeholders together, and how do you work with them in this project? If I may go to André.
Yes, the difficult was, of course, the COVID pandemic that prevents a lot of personal attendance in Mauritania by ourselves. Our main stakeholders are, of course, scientists on one hand, and of course, NGOs that find their way via blue classes to reach school kids in Nouakchott and Ouadchibou, especially carried out by our partner Nature Mauritanie. And they produce a series of very nice video clips that tries to explain in simple sketches the complexity and the value of Mauritania's marine resources. And these video clips are available on YouTube for the public. And that is a very nice tool to reach the people. And then, of course, a very important stakeholder is the oil and gas industry. And that was, of course, a major pop-up during the lifetime of our WASP project. And that is something that Sandra could explain how and what is happening there.
Yeah, on top of all the fishing impacts we just talked about, there is also an oil and gas sector developing in the area. And that oil field was right in the middle of the industrial fishing zone. And it were actually the oil and gas company that discovered corals in that area. And this triggered an interest of André's institute to do more research in the area, and also the Spanish Research Institute. And when they mapped the whole area, they found that it's actually the largest cold water coral reef in the world. And this is, of course, very interesting, which should have repercussions on how that area is managed as well. So, of course, the Banc Park and its biodiversity is very special, but also within the industrial fishing zone, we now know that there are very vulnerable ecosystems, and something should be done to protect it. So, yeah, the entry point now to put biodiversity issues on the table within the area of the industrial fishing zone and main area of the oil and gas sector is via the oil and gas sector. We have established a dialogue with BP, which is now an oil company who will start to exploit one of the largest offshore gas fields in the world. And works have not started yet. So this is really the moment in which scientists can contribute to the way how this gas will be exploited.
Maybe if I can just interrupt you, Sandra. I mean, I see a very important role that communication and awareness, in a sense, has created this ongoing dialogue between the stakeholders and BP that is basically facilitated by you. And let me ask André, your role as an institute, how do you ensure that the importance, so you've mentioned that this is an area that has or harbors one of the largest cold corals in the world, but the locals or the local stakeholders in Mauritania, do they understand and know the importance of the resource that they have? And how do you ensure that the research that you're doing or the mapping exercise that you're doing actually finds its way in the public space for them to be able to understand the importance of the resources that they have, that they can actually be able to be proactive in the process as well?
Exactly. Good question. And that is definitely the main motivation to create and to generate the WASP project. Bringing the scientific knowledge to the public and not hide it within the world of scientific, difficult to understand publications, for instance. And one of the main tasks or objectives of the WASP project is together with the IMROP Institute based near Nouadhibou, near Cap Blanc, we want to assist in developing a marine GIS data system that is open also to the public, so that there are, at the end of the project, easy digestible maps and information layers developed that can be downloaded or viewed from any iPad or any mobile phone, for instance. And therefore, the measures and activities we implement in WASP are now discussions that should enter up in a long-term research project. So WASP will finish hopefully in 6 months by now because of the existing contract situation. But what is more important is the next step to create sustainability to the things, to the objectives that we have just started to implement, like the marine GIS, the voucher collection, the DNA lab.
Thanks for this excellent insight into all the different approaches you're taking. And I assume that with the DNA lab, you mean a laboratory to analyze genetic samples and identify species. So in summary, WASP is a good incubator for all sorts of activities you started now, and you want to proceed in the future as well. One thing I also came across when I read about the project that sounded a lot like also policy impact work is that you are working with all the multitude of partners and stakeholders on a biodiversity action plan. And for me, that was a new term. Can you maybe, and it sounded like this is also a long-term investment that you're planning here. Can you talk a bit about this, what this is and how it fits in the project?
Well, the term biodiversity action plan actually comes from the oil and gas industry, and we convinced BP to work with scientific institutes who collected the information in Mauritania these past 15 years. So with André, with Instituto Español Oceanografía, but also IMROP and also CROT in Senegal, because the gas field is right on the border between Senegal and Mauritania. And biodiversity action plan is made for this particular project of BP. So they reanalyze biodiversity, which was not done correctly during the environmental impact assessment. So if there is a lot of data missing, then an oil company does a biodiversity action plan afterwards, which is later then integrated in the design of the project. And this is where the term comes from. But hopefully this document, the biodiversity action plan, will make available to the Mauritanian state, but also to the state, to the government of Senegal, a comprehensive overview of a lot of complicated scientific research, which is now only available in the form of articles, thousands of articles that nobody can really make a sense of if you are a decision maker and you're outside the scientific community. So it's really difficult to see how this information, this piece of information will impact or should impact management. But in this comprehensive overview, which we will make for the BAP, this will have, of course, direct repercussions on how BP will do their project, but hopefully it will also have impact on how fishery management is done there, and also how nature conservation is done there. Because if we only protect areas on the coast and next to the coast, we're not going to make it.
Thanks. That already answered my follow-up question I had there, since we are starting to talk about long-term impacts of the project and sustainability. Yeah, I wanted to know if you see any impact on the environmental research and planning landscape beyond the project that you're you're aiming to have, but apparently you're working on that already with the Biodiversity Action Plan.
Yeah, actually already before the MeerWissen project, André and I and IMROP and Instituto Española de Oceanografía already made a plan on where the Mauritanian government should protect sensitive areas on the coral reef. So we already laid out a plan, really minimal areas that should where all bottom trawling activity should be prohibited now. But this was communicated to the Ministry of Fisheries, but until now, no response.
I mean, obviously, only so much can be achieved within a 2-year project. I want to believe that given the time that is already spent in the project and the fact that there's only 6 months, remaining before the end of the project, I want to ask, in terms of your collaboration with the local scientists, researchers, NGOs, what kind of impact do you foresee this collaboration having on them in terms of how they conduct their research and how they can be able to continue with some of the knowledge that they have gained in your interaction with them? So maybe if I could start with André, what impact does WASP have on the local capacity landscape?
I hope, and I'm very confident that WASP has the potential to create a big footprint, especially for IMROP and its outcome at the end. In our next workshop, scheduled roughly for November this year, we will have a lot of heavy negotiations with the director's board of IMROP, for instance, to talk about how to install a voucher collection, how to generate durability and sustainability of the marine GIS system, to make sure that the data will be processed and sorted and formatted in digestible layers for the public, and also the DNA libraries. And we also, and that is probably quite important, it's not that we want to invest in concrete or in new labs or new collection facilities. We also want to ensure and support IMROP in bringing down on an annual basis a sort of floating university. We are just constructing a new coastal research vessel for Senckenberg, and it should be capable of going down to Mauritanian waters every year, especially in the winter months period for 2 to 3 months, to stay permanently in Mauritanian waters and to assist IMROP in monitoring long-term projects. And we can train Mauritanian students and researchers how to use, how to maintain this equipment. And at the end of the project, it should be all in Mauritanian hands, with well-trained people, well-educated people, and of course with a strong link to the public, to show the treasures of the Mauritanian biodiversity. Such a reference collection is not only made for scientists, it's also made for the public, for school classes to walk through the shelves to see a diorama of seascapes, of fascinating coral reefs, to make them curious. That's happening in our waters, and indeed, just to open the minds, not of only scientists or for scientists, but especially also for the local people. So that should become, well, let's say, it's a cathedral of knowledge to everyone. Well, this is a vision, of course, but I think it's not too unrealistic.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on this. Well, the biggest impact of the MeerWissen project is that contact has now been established between André and IMROP in a more durable way than existed before. Before, it was just a matter of the research proposals were all written in in Germany. They came with the ship, they asked for authorization, invited a local research on board to observe. But now they will much more become an active partner in the plans that André has for the area, and they can really bring in their own ideas and co-design future scientific projects, which is of course a major accomplishment instead of having parachute scientists going to Africa, take away the data and bye-bye.
Excellent. Thank you both. Yeah, you seem to be not only having science in mind, but also the policy impact of your work and the local communities living on the coast and in the Banc marine protected area. Maybe to the listeners out there, in one or two very short sentences now, some closing remarks from each of you from the project, which can be maybe also taken up in other of the MeerWissen projects or in general.
Yeah, I can start. Well, the MeerWissen project was equipped with a low amount of money, but I'm quite sure that at the end of the lifetime of the project, we made the best use of it to increase the personal contacts, because confidence in each other and between the partners is the most important issue of all. And therefore, I'm really thankful for the GIS that we got the positive evaluation on our proposal for the WASP project 2 years ago, that we learned how co-design should function. I remember the very famous workshop GIS has organized in Langebaan in South Africa. And for our project, this co-design workshop was just the right time to modify, to streamline, to adapt the impact of our proposal in a better way. And at the end, that pays out. Yes, that's good.
Well, yeah, co-design is paramount for scientific research collaborations between Northern Europe and African countries. However, if you talk about communicating scientific evidence and the answers that scientific research is calling for, then it becomes a different ballgame. And then you have to draw your own line, because getting this kind of environmental science to the policy level is a struggle.
Time's flying as we are wrapping up another episode of OceanInSight. It was exciting to get first-hand information of a project that is directly engaging with the private sector. While this can be challenging and frustrating in many occasions, it seems like in the case of the Banc Dargah and the WASP project, it really played out in the end. Please tune in again with us, as next time we'll talk about how to set up a multinational governance network in the Western Indian Ocean.